All right. I want to ask you this. Does the Bible encourage or discourage patriotism? How zealous are we to get in regards to politics as believers? Should Christians boycott companies, rally, push policy, and vote in accordance to their faith? I did see on Facebook this week, and these go in waves of popularity and stuff. But a lot of people were, because of Nike posted a commercial with Kaepernick, and you have the whole anthem thing that's been blown up for a while now, and people just freak out about this stuff and boycotting companies. What do you say to Christians, and how do you mix that? Are we supposed to be patriots, or, was Jesus nonpartisan?
Well, Jesus, you can't call Jesus nonpartisan. Jesus started the nation of Israel.
Right.
It's like he was the king. Before there was ever a king, it was the Lord that was the king of Israel.
Right.
And it wasn't until the people started looking around at the kingdoms next to Israel that they wanted an earthly king. And in fact, when they asked for it, Samuel said, "The Lord is your king." Why are you abandoning the Lord for a man? And so you can't say that God's not patriotic. He literally started the nation of Israel, and it was his representative nation. It still is to this day. It was his representative nation on the planet. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, Jesus was patriotic.
And he used that. He used Israel as a picture that's outside of the world.
Right, yeah.
So I guess you could say he's the most partisan dude there is.
Yeah, exactly. Israel was to be a light to the nations. Ronald Reagan famously quoted, the United States is a city shining on a hill. Well, that's what Israel was. That's when Jesus talks about that in the New Testament, but in the book of Deuteronomy, God tells the people of Israel, "You are going to be a witness for me, whether it's a witness for good or a witness for bad. If you're doing the things that I call you to, I'm going to bless you so much that people are going to wonder why you're so blessed. And if you refuse to follow me, then I'm going to curse you so much that people are going to wonder why you're cursed." And the answer in either case is going to be the fact that I'm real and I'm your God. And either I'm your God and you're following and serving me, and that's why you're blessed, or I'm your God and you've abandoned me, and that's why you're cursed. But either way, people are going to know that I'm real, is what God says to Israel. And so Israel was supposed to be God's nation. And so, yes, God is patriotic. Yes, Jesus is patriotic. Jesus is somebody who held to Scripture. In 1 Peter chapter 2, when Peter is talking to Christians, he says this. This is in 2:13 through 17. He says, "Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. As free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king." And so, yeah, I'm supposed to be a good citizen. When somebody looks at a Christian, what they're supposed to be seeing is somebody who actually does what the laws say, who's actually interested in justice and righteousness and all that stuff. Civil authorities should not be afraid of us in the sense of we're just going to come along and cause some kind of insurrection just because we feel like it. We need to be people who are doing the right thing by governors and authorities. The Bible says in 1 Peter chapter 2 or 1 Timothy chapter 2 that we're to be praying for government authorities, and so it's one of those things that the early Roman emperors did not realize about Christians, that they were enjoined to make sure that they were honoring civil government. Christians were slandered and in the Roman Empire, and they had all kinds of weird things that they said about Christians. Kind of like today, it's like Christians want to kill people, and Christians they literally thought that Christians ate babies. They thought that communion was, because you're eating the blood and drinking the blood and eating the body of Christ, figuratively speaking. But that's what was getting passed around. They were saying that Christians ate babies, and so nothing but slander and gossip and nonsense when Christians were the best citizens ever. That's the way that it's supposed to be. I have an accountability before God to be faithful with what's been given to me. And so you have a number of parables, the parable of the talents, the parable of the minas, and certain things have been given to us as believers. And generally speaking, when we look at those things, it's that whole thing where, a guy's given a certain amount of money, and what does he do with the money? Does he take it out and increase it, or does he go and bury it someplace? And we're held accountable for what we do for the kingdom in this life. And so, what a lot of people like to do is they like to take Christianity or take religious observance and separate it from every other part of life. Well, I'm not just accountable for my Christian walk in church or around Christians. I'm accountable for my Christian walk in the business place. I'm accountable for my Christian walk, as we talked about with our submission to government authorities. I'm accountable in every arena of my life, in my family, everywhere. I'm accountable for those things. And so God's put me in the United States. And in the United States, I have the most freedom that anybody on this planet has ever had. I have one of the best opportunities to influence the world for righteousness that anybody on this planet has ever had in all of history. And we're accountable to God to make sure that we treat that in a way that God would have us treat it. And so I absolutely believe that if Jesus was here on the planet, he would be voting, and he would be looking at the guys that he's voting for and voting for them based on biblical principle. And so it's something that needs to happen, not just party affiliation, biblical principle. And so that's, again, something that needs to take place when we go to the voting booth. And, famously, I can't remember the guy who quoted this, but it was in the 1800s, every country gets the government that they deserve. And in the situation where we're in, a lot of times the reason that we are getting the politicians that we get is because we vote for them, and we get the consequences that come from that. So need to be voting. Yeah.
Do you? I get two things. What about boycotting? Do you boycott companies and make a big old deal, or do you just live your life and whatever?
It depends. There have been times when I boycotted companies, and so when Home Depot was selling holiday trees, I walked in and asked for a manager and said, "I don't want a holiday tree. I want a Christmas tree. Do you have any of those?"
What did he do? Just look at you
deer caught in the headlights, and I just went, I'm not buying it from you, man. And so there have been times when I boycotted companies. Anytime a company wants to get involved in the culture wars and decides to make some statement that's anti-Christian or anti-Jesus, I really don't want to hand them money, and generally I'm just going through living my life until some guy makes a big stink about something. And I don't expect non-Christians to act like Christians, but when you want to make a statement against Jesus or about righteousness and that kind of stuff, and you want to be snotty and mean about the whole thing, I'll write you a letter and I won't buy your stuff anymore.
Right.
And so that's what I would do with anybody. If I walked into a bank and the bank manager is screaming at me saying, we hate Christians, guess where I'm not banking?
Yeah.
It's like I'm going to turn around and walk out of the place. I'll go find a bank where either where they like Christians, or they don't care. Either one is fine. But you want to be a big snot about stuff. I don't have a problem not buying your goods. But you guys, every time that I do that, I make a phone call or I write a letter. specifically, when I first moved here, Bank of America made a big deal about, the whole thing with gay stuff, and just made this big deal, and was basically bashing believers as they were doing it, and wrote a letter, made phone calls, did that kind of stuff, and then I moved my bank account. And again, it's just like you want to make this big bold statement and alienate half your customer base. Okay, and if you're looking at alienating me, I'm alienated, and so then I just move on. So I'm pretty practical about that. I don't go around looking for trouble, but there are places that I don't want to spend my money. So.
All right, rounding out this thought on patriotism, do you feel, and you're a little older than me, a couple years older than me, do you feel like that has...
Did you say I'm littler than you?
I'm being nice.
I think he said that.
Little.
You said littler.
Yeah, a little wiser, let's put it that way.
You said, well, you tried to say a little older, but it came out littler. This guy's 6'8". He's 6'8", 6'7".
Yeah, but
6'8"?
you could...
What are you?
I'm 5'20".
You're lying. Okay, no, you're not. He's 6'8".
So, on patriotism, do you feel like it's fallen? Because I'm reading a book right now, biography on George Washington, and going from those guys, founding father guys who were, I know there were some deists, but for the most part, like George Washington, he was a believer, man. I'm reading some of the letters he wrote, and in a couple sentences are allusions to 7 different Bible verses in his writing. And he was a patriot, and he believed that the Lord had providence on this country and stuff. And you can just see that awesome believers, total patriots, and then they set up our government according to what they believed in biblical values. Do you think that we've fallen? Because I look around and it's like, where are these guys? I don't see them anymore on a whole basis, to the point where we're kneeling for the flag and going, well, what's wrong with that? Well, look at how we started. We don't teach that anymore.
Right. Well, it's one of the things that happens with people is, what goes in is what comes out. And so when I was a kid in school, they literally taught citizenship.
Really?
Yeah, literally taught citizenship. And so, you'd stand up at the beginning and do the whole pledge to the flag. And I know that schools are still doing that. But then we had classes on citizenship. When you talked about government, you were talking about citizenship and what it was like to be a good citizen. You literally got taught that in school. And when they went through and taught about Washington and Jefferson and Adams and all of these guys, they went through and they talked about what was happening with the revolution and why they were doing the revolt and the bravery and the courage that was involved in those things. And George Washington's a hero. And I don't care what anybody says. Anybody who says he's not doesn't know what they're talking about. You don't know history. Go get an education. And if you didn't get an education that includes the character and the lifestyle and the attitude of George Washington, you don't know what you're talking about. If all you got was he's a white slave owner and taken over from the Indians and that kind of stuff, it's just
So are you saying that's what it is education, that we're not being taught?
I
therefore
think
patriotism is on the way down?
Yeah, I think that specifically you have kids who've been indoctrinated to a certain way of thinking about the United States, and unless that's combated in the home, or a kid actually has the gumption to pick up a real history book, a real one, to pick up a real history book, then they're walking around with bad information. It's just one-sided. One of the things that we always have to understand about people in history is that they're men of their times. I can guarantee you that in 50 years, people are going to be looking back on some of you and thinking that you're nothing but a barbarian, and because you have certain attitudes towards certain things. But it's just something that we have going on in our culture. I can guarantee you that within the next 20 years, if it doesn't get worse, that people are going to be looking back at your Facebook posts and calling you a barbarian. When they They look at the things that were actually written about people, and that kind of thing. It's like if it was a choice between living right now, as far as the cultural dialogue goes, or living in the early 1800s, I'd pick living in the early 1800s any day.
100%.
Because people just do things and say things that are completely out of line, and you are a barbarian, and so. But I do understand the culture. I understand. And so if I was coming back and looking at your life, and I was having to write your biography on the issue, I'd go, well, he did this, he did this, he did this, he said this, he said this, and these are all awful things, but this is how the culture was going at that time. And this is where these people were. And you have to do that with everyone in history. And so you don't just you don't judge people by the cultural norms that you have at a certain moment in time. You can't. And so David was somebody who had more than one wife. And that was a cultural norm for kings at the time. It was something that was anti-biblical. It was something that was that God had commanded that the kings not do. And he still did it because that's where the culture was at, and he paid the consequences for that.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. And you have that in all kinds of arenas. You have situations in the New Testament where actually most of the Christians in the New Testament were slaves, and there's a small letter, the letter to Philemon, that was written from Paul to a slave owner who was a Christian, telling him that he should free Onesimus, the slave. It was written to Philemon, telling him that he should free Onesimus because Onesimus was a brother. And you have slavery disappearing in the Roman Empire specifically because of Christian influence. Well, it's stuff that happened in the United States. The abolitionist movement was primarily Christian, and even in the Constitution, you have situations in the Constitution where literally they're trying to write the Constitution in such a way as to basically get rid of slavery. It's really famously spoken about that slaves under the Constitution were 3/5 of a man. And anybody who says that does not know the reason for the amendment that was put in there, or for the ruling that was put in there. It was specifically put in there so that the southern states could not take every one of the slaves on their plantations and make them vote in a certain way and overwhelm basically put in votes for slavery from slaves who are forced to vote that way, and have greater representation. Basically, it was about representation in each one of the states. And so basically what they did was they came up with a compromise. And so originally in the Constitution, they didn't want slaves counted as citizens, because if you count them as citizens, then what happens is you get greater representation in the Congress. And so what they had to do was they had to come up with a compromise, and the only compromise that the South would hold to was 3/5 of a man. And that way they didn't get more congressmen in Congress from the southern states, and again overwhelm the majority that would have been there from the northern states. And people who don't know their history have no clue about that, and they just walk off with, slaves are 3/5 of a man. Well, there was a good reason for that, and it was pro African American. It's why they did it. And again, you have guys who were in the constitutional conventions who were absolutely anti-slavery, and what they were doing was trying to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. Didn't take too long before we had a war over it and got rid of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Washington freed his slaves when he died.
Yep.